It's the Regular Expressions Podcast. Join Noah Heldman and Ben Griswold as they talk about technology consulting, AI, and more. In episode 29, Ben and Noah discuss the latest updates to AI coding agents and the hidden costs and rate limits of current models. By the time this episode airs, I bet 2 new models have been released, and prices have doubled. Fun!
Cursor just released version 3 a few days ago. What is Cursor? Ben's going to tell us in a minute, but their new version has what's called the agents window. It's an agent-first interface, so very AI-centric for a tool that's supposed to be very developer-centric. Here's what it says. It provides a unified workspace to build with agents across repos and environments, including local, cloud, remote SSH, and more. It combines the power of parallel agents with the depth and control of a development environment. So, Ben, what is Cursor and how do you use it? And let's figure out how this makes us feel.
Cursor allows us to generate AI-assisted code. Cursor is a product that sits on top of VS Code, which is, I'd say, the most available product on the market. So adding these agents, as you said, the agent window, it allows us not only to, within a single application, be there working alongside, maybe directing, being the boss of the agents. We now have a pane, the agent window, which allows us to sit on top of multiple projects and multiple agents all at once. You can see when you're working on an app where there's a focus of a single application and driving, there's as much of a working relationship with the agent where you're looking at the code base, you're inspecting, you're tweaking, you're doing all the right developer-y things. And now that there's this agent window, it's more, hey, agent, do this stuff for me, and it goes. You lose your visibility into the code, in fact. So it's a very different way of engineering from what we had, the Cursor, which just sat on top of Visual Studio, and now the agent windows with Cursor 3, where we have really abstracted away VS Code. And now we're really coding or telling something to code within this single pane.
I actually saw that they moved away from VS Code as their foundation, as part of this release. So not only did they move away from the VS Code conceptually, they actually rewrote the entire Cursor code base in Rust and TypeScript. And who knows what that means, but it has the potential to introduce a whole new set of bugs and issues, of course. I'm sure it was largely spec coded, AI coded, the Cursor foundational stuff. The agents window feels like the next push or evolution towards what you and I have been doing with these tools, where you would start by writing your own code and asking AI to maybe fill in some gaps or write some tests on your behalf. Then you would have AI write a whole function and you might double check it with some tests and then have AI write a test. And you're, like you said, inspecting the code, making sure that things look the way they're supposed to. And then as AI evolved, as we evolved in our trust of it, whether we should have or not, we're asking AI to build larger features, or if they're small enough, entire applications from a single spec. A spec that we thought through very carefully, but really one input for a first version of a fully working app. And that's what this feels like, because we have had to look less at the code that's generated than we did anytime during this journey, this evolution, because it's getting better. And ultimately, if the system performs the way it's supposed to and it passes all the tests, and you can walk through it manually, smoke test it, and it's doing all the things that it should be doing if you had coded it directly, maybe it's okay to never see code, as crazy as that might sound. I don't know, but I do know you told me something about what this version can do that would be one of the other missing pieces for the development experience, and that's related to launching the app and inspecting the app. Can you talk a little bit more about that and how it works?
Yeah, this was a very cursory look on the latest cursor. And what it promises to do is it promises to not only support your coding, but also the inspection of the code that it's producing. Not always just the code, but how it's rendered. So it can debug for you if you were to say, I have the fonts aren't correct here, or the distance between this div and this div, or something isn't rendering appropriately. The agents can now inspect how the application is rendered in the browser, find that area in which you deem problematic, and iterate until it has, in fact, rendered the site the way that it was intending. So I haven't played with that feature yet myself, but I really like that we've been, with all of our tools, allowing for them to start, or all of our AI assisted things, to start using the tools that make the most sense for the job it's doing. Simple one, access to the internet so it can do some more prolific searching and research. Now at the code level, access to the rendered application so it can inspect and then adjust accordingly.
When I use Cursor, and I'm not using version 3 yet, but I'll be trying it out shortly, I have multiple windows open for the different apps that I'm working on. And I have somewhere between 1 and 5 windows open, each dedicated to its own app with its own chat history, and maybe different chat histories for different parts of the application. Each app is going to have its own spec files, its own cursor rules potentially, although there's some global cursor rules. And that helps me treat them as separate entities. It sounds like from what you said at the top of this episode, you have visibility over multiple projects from one pane of glass, so to speak. Do you know if you can have conversations with any of those apps from one place, so it has context for all of them? Or are you still choosing which app you're talking to and then issuing that command or prompt?
The interface is laid out in a way that you not only have visibility into each project, but you also have visibility into each of the chats or agents that you've spun off tied to that project. So you have multiple chat histories and multiple agents, which could in fact be running in parallel. They can run in parallel with a single project or in parallel across projects. And so for every window that you have open today in Cursor, that would be represented in this agent view as open projects, which you can then navigate.
Got it. You and I have both now been using Claude Code as well, taken some courses, really trying to dig in to make sure we understand that. I think we've both used it on actual projects now. So I feel like we have a pretty solid basis for comparison with Claude Code features and the things that people tend to use: commands, skills, hooks, agents, sub-agents, all of these different things, as well as the Claude MD file. And then we've both done quite a bit with Cursor, including using the Claude models, the Opus and Sonnet models within Cursor. I'm curious what your experience has been now bouncing between these two. What are your current takeaways, knowing that they could literally change tomorrow based on what's released?
Mhm. I've always felt comfortable inside of VS Code. So because Cursor was a natural extension of that, it just felt that I still was the engineer. I still had visibility into the code, and I was essentially driving. Right? Once I moved over to um, Claude Code, I felt that the code was abstracted away almost entirely, right? Working in the terminal exclusively just felt weird. It felt that I was working with the agents to develop the code, but I couldn't see it. I no longer felt like a coder. I no longer felt like an engineer. That abstraction layer was unsettling. So that to me was the very core difference between the two experiences. And you might have experienced this also, Noah, where now you can bring up Claude Code within VS Code. So you can be a little bit more comfortable with how you're interacting. You can see your actual code that it's producing. You can tweak that code. You can ensure that you're still working with VS Code the way you always have, but you're being assisted by an agent rather than the agent doing all of the work uh, invisibly.
I have never had Claude Code just running in a terminal by itself. I've only brought it up within Cursor, which is kind of funny. But just open a terminal within Cursor in the code base where I've already got a conversation going through Cursor, probably with the Opus 4.6 model, and then open a terminal in that same project, run the Claude command, and now I'm in that session. And I'm not jumping back and forth between them because that would confuse me and probably both agents. But I'm going through that experience against the same code base. So I have a good analog and I can see how each one does what it does. I do agree with you that it feels more invisible because it's a little harder to inspect the Claude history compared to inspecting the Cursor history of your chat. Maybe it's possible and I'm just not good at it, but Cursor's a little more natural for me in going back into a conversational flow. It feels more like you're working in a text editor feedback loop. The terminal with Claude Code feels like a terminal and a set of terminal commands, and you don't even have the same ability to click and navigate and move around the way you do in just grabbing text and moving it. It does feel limiting. And I think the thing that gets me the most is it's just much slower. And I don't understand why, but Claude Code running the Opus 4.6 model takes twice as long or more than Cursor running the same Opus 4.6 model to fulfill the same command, the same set of instructions. So that's frustrating. I don't know if you've experienced that.
I sure have. And I don't understand the reason either. I always felt that with Cursor, it was the intermediary and probably doing some really fun stuff to the context before it sends it out to whatever model it's using, right? I felt that because of that interpretation layer, there would be a cost in time and probably a cost in tokens as well. But apparently that's not the case. What I am doing, though, and I really do enjoy trying to bring this back, is I'm using Composer, the models from Cursor. They moved to, I'm on Cursor 2. I understand that Cursor 3 hasn't been offered up to the general public yet, but I'm looking forward to Composer 3. I think that's really going to be quite the boon. And what I'm noticing just between both of those solutions, what Cursor's offering is, man, and which is super nice inside of Cursor, it tells you how much of your token store you've used. And it is really hard to run up your tokens if you're using one of the Composer models. Have you noticed that, or do you use Composer?
I do. I switched over to it on a couple projects at your recommendation, and I did run into the the Opus limit, and I probably overused Opus for things that didn't require its depth and certainly not its expense. But I ran into limits with the Opus model about halfway through the month, and I wasn't going to pay extra for more usage. So I took your advice and switched to Composer really for the rest of that month. That was March. And it was very solid most of the time, which is the same I could say for Opus. Really have a good experience up to a certain point. Maybe it's loss of context, loss of continuity that tends to cause issues no matter what the model is. But with how much cheaper it is, Composer versus Opus, it's absolutely a go-to now, and something I'm going to keep trying out to see how those limits look. But the cost is real, and I think you had an experience with that, not just with Claude Code, but maybe with other Claude tools. I know you haven't had the best experience in terms of cost.
Yeah, that's true. I do want to call out though, you're using Cursor. Is it Max? What's the $200
Ultra
version?
Yes, the
Ultra.
The $200 a month plan, right?
And in using the Anthropic models, you're blowing through that in less than a month. And we're not the typical 8 hour a day plus 40 hours a week plus engineers. Right. That isn't our core job. Right. So it is remarkable. And I don't know how some companies are able to maintain what it requires to use the best of the Anthropic models. Now, I have recently purchased I think it's Pro, the $20 Anthropic Claude package. And I've always leaned in pretty heavily into ChatGPT. I've had at least the Pro all the way. I don't know if it's Ultra, whatever the $200 a month version is, for some time, for well over a year, maybe two. I don't know. I just grabbed Claude and $20 version. And what I'm finding is I can spend less than 10 minutes on a conversation. I feel like I've even spent 5 minutes on a conversation, and it says your session has exceeded its limits. Please check back in 2, 3, 4 hours. And all of this seems very arbitrary to me, but it is unbelievably frustrating. And what frustrates me the most is all of those goofy verbs they use each time there's thinking. If you have a frustrated user, I'd say the last thing they want to see are goofy verbs ending in ing, that half of them I believe are made up, but they're nonsensical for sure. And if I had one setting I could change, probably first is allow me to have longer conversations in context. The second one is please don't upset me with your silly verb choices.
That's awesome.
Yeah. How about you, Noah? How has your experience been with any of the Anthropic tools?
Yeah, similar in a lot of ways. Just because you mentioned the verbs, when the big Claude Code leak happened, one person was at least as frustrated as you, and probably much more so, because he focused on finding in the code where those verbs were generated. And he found the file, and there's almost 200 of them, many of them just silly words, smarticulating or whatever it says. I might have made that one up, but it's just as bad as the rest. And that's the kind of thing that people were looking for on top of how is Claude Code structured? What is its magic that makes it, for most people, an incredibly effective tool? And I think the interesting and kind of sad thing is, like so many other things we've talked about on this podcast, it's just another wrapper around an LLM. And an LLM takes text input and predicts what the next text output should be in a loop. And that's pretty much it. And we are blown away by what it can do, but that's really all it can do. And the tool they have to make it do the best job is just a whole bunch of prompts. It's a lot of guidance. It's a lot of rules and constraints that follow a pattern that AI is now really good at processing and understanding. But that all becomes part of the context. It's carried with your messages, so extra token usage. So I'm guessing that the thing we talked about with Claude Code being slower is it's doing some of this work to pull in all the different pieces that it thinks are relevant to what you're trying to accomplish and mashing those all together into its version of a context that's going to make sense to accompany your question that you asked. And when it works great. It produces amazing results, and they're just slower. So yes, slower. I haven't run out of tokens or run into the problem you're describing where I can't have a conversation for more than 10 minutes. But honestly, I haven't really tried. I have the same pro plan you do for Claude Code. I haven't had a long enough conversation in the desktop app to hit that limit. So I bet it'll happen. And I think I have to try it after this episode just to prove you right.
Oh, I would like that. I've had this occur on desktop as well as mobile, and I was traveling over this past weekend, and it was somewhat comical waiting to board, and it's like, oh, your session has exceeded its limits after this 10 minutes, and then it says please check back in at 9:00. Which was 2 hours after I would have already landed. So it's like this flight from Sacramento into San Diego. And yes, I still wasn't able to do any sort of, fun brainstorming with chat.
Did you at least watch a terrible TV show or movie to pass the time? Or God forbid, talk to the people you were with.
We're at this point in our lives. The kids are older, and so we're all over the plate now. It's wherever we get the best seat for ourselves. So no, I didn't talk to anybody, but I did watch Uncut Gems.
Oh, I've never seen
halfway
that.
through. So no spoiler, please.
Okay, yeah, no, haven't seen it. I can't spoil it, but I could probably have a conversation with Claude and learn what the first half is all about before I run out of tokens. And I think we should leave it there.
That sounds like a plan. I think we also, just as a next step here, I'd be very interested in speaking with somebody on this podcast that has been engrossed with Claude Code for 6-12 months. I really want to understand their workflow and how, and this is an engineer. This isn't somebody who hasn't been, leveraging the right IDEs, etc. for 15 years now. I want to talk to somebody who really knows this stuff and prove me wrong. Say, Ben, this is what you actually need to do to harness the power of Anthropic.
I think I know just the person, and I'm not going to say it right now because I might be wrong, but we'll talk about it after. We'll set that guest up, and we'll learn all the good things we need to learn. So thanks.
Thanks, Noah.